Welcome to Bookish English, where your voice matters and your story deserves to be heard. Today, we are not just learning English, we are learning how to bring English to life through storytelling. If you have ever felt shy, confused, or afraid to speak, this lesson is for you. By the end of this session, you will not only understand how stories work, but you will feel confident enough to create and tell your own. So take a deep breath, believe in yourself, and let us begin this powerful journey together. 1. Why stories matter. Let me begin with a simple question. When you think about your childhood, what do you remember more clearly, grammar rules or stories? Most people do not remember the rules. They remember a grandmother telling a bedtime story, a teacher reading a short tale in class, or a movie scene that made them laugh or cry. This is not an accident. The human brain is designed to remember stories because stories connect ideas with emotion, and emotion makes memory strong. When you learn English through storytelling, you are not only learning words, you are building memories, and memories stay with you much longer than isolated grammar exercises ever can. Grammar rules are important, of course. They help us understand structure and accuracy. However, grammar alone is like learning how to build a car without ever driving it. You may understand the parts, but you do not feel the movement. Stories, on the other hand, give language life. When you hear a story about a boy who lost his way in a big city but finally found his home, you automatically follow the journey. You imagine the streets. You feel his fear. You celebrate his happiness at the end. In that process, your brain connects new English words with images and feelings, and because of that connection, you remember them naturally. Think about how children learn their first language. A child does not sit in a classroom studying grammar charts. Instead, the child listens to stories. Parents speak in simple sentences, they repeat ideas, and they use emotion in their voice. The child listens again and again, and slowly, without pressure, the child begins to speak. Stories are full of repetition, simple structure, and clear meaning, so they make learning smooth and natural. When you learn English through storytelling, you are using the same powerful method that children use. It may look simple, but it is incredibly effective. Another important reason why storytelling works is that it improves vocabulary and context. When you study vocabulary from a list, you may memorize 10 new words today, but tomorrow you might forget half of them. However, when you hear a word inside a story, you see how it is used. You understand its emotion, its tone, and its purpose. For example, if you hear the word disappointed in a story where a girl did not pass her exam, you do not just learn the meaning, you feel it. You understand when and how to use it. That is the difference between memorizing a word and truly knowing a word. Storytelling also improves fluency because stories have natural flow. They move from beginning to middle to end. When you retell a story, your brain practices organizing thoughts logically. You start with one day, then you explain what happened, and finally you conclude with "in the end." This simple structure trains your mind to think in English instead of translating from your native language. Over time, you notice that sentences come to you more easily, and you speak with less hesitation. That is fluency developing naturally. Confidence is another gift that storytelling gives you. Many learners feel afraid to speak English because they worry about making mistakes. They think, what if my grammar is wrong? What if people laugh at me? But when you tell a story, your focus shifts from grammar to meaning. You want to share something interesting. You want the listener to understand your message, and when your message is clear, small grammar mistakes become less important. Stories give you permission to speak freely because communication becomes the goal, not perfection. There is also a powerful connection between emotion and memory. When you laugh, your brain releases chemicals that help you remember better. When you feel surprise or curiosity, your attention increases. Stories create emotion naturally. A sudden problem in the story makes you curious. A happy ending makes you smile. Because of these emotional moments, your brain stays active and alert. Learning stops feeling like hard work and starts feeling like an experience. Listening, combined with imagination, makes learning even faster. When you listen to a story, you are not just hearing words, you are creating pictures in your mind. You imagine the characters, the setting, and the events. This mental activity strengthens understanding because you are using more parts of your brain at the same time. The more senses you involve in learning, the deeper the learning becomes. That is why a short, simple story can sometimes teach you more than a long grammar explanation. Stories also reduce the fear of speaking because they give you something to talk about. Instead of struggling to think of ideas, you already have a structure. You can retell a movie you watched. You can describe a small event from your day. You can share a childhood memory. When you practice storytelling regularly, you stop saying, "I don't know what to say." Instead, you begin saying, "Let me tell you something." That change in mindset is powerful, and it transforms you from a silent learner into a confident speaker. If you look at real life, you will see that storytelling is everywhere. Movies tell stories. Novels tell stories. Even conversations between friends are small stories. When someone says, "You won't believe what happened to me today," they are starting a story. And you listen carefully because stories are interesting. When you learn English through movies, books, and daily conversations, you are training yourself to understand natural language, not just textbook examples. This makes your English practical and alive. So, what is the true message here? Storytelling is not extra practice. It is not something you do only for fun. It is the foundation of natural English fluency. It teaches vocabulary in context, builds fluency through structure, strengthens memory through emotion, and increases confidence through meaningful communication. When you choose storytelling as your learning method, you are choosing a path that is logical, powerful, and deeply human. If you truly want to speak English naturally, do not only study rules. Listen to stories. Read stories. Tell stories. Because when you master storytelling, you are not just learning English, you are living it. 2. Story structure basics. If storytelling is the heart of learning English, then structure is its backbone. Without structure, even a beautiful idea can become confusing. Many learners say, "I know some words, but I don't know how to organize my thoughts." The problem is not vocabulary. The problem is structure. When you understand how a story is built, your ideas become clear, your speech becomes confident, and your listener can follow you easily. Structure gives direction to your thoughts, just like a roadmap guides a traveler. Every simple story has three main parts: the beginning, the middle, and the ending. This may sound too basic, but it is powerful. The beginning introduces the situation. It answers questions like, who is in the story? Where are they? When is this happening? The middle shows what happens. Usually, there is a problem or challenge. The ending explains how the problem is solved. When you follow this simple pattern, your story becomes logical and easy to understand. Let us look closely at the beginning. The beginning is where you set the stage. This is called the setting. The setting tells us where and when the story happens. For example, you might say, "One day, in a small village, a young boy was walking to school." In one sentence, we already know the time is not specific, but in the past, the place is a small village, and the character is a young boy. That is enough information to start. You do not need complicated sentences, you only need clarity. After the setting, you introduce the characters. Characters are the people or animals in the story. They are the heart of your narrative because the audience connects with them. When you describe a character, keep it simple. Mention their name, age, job, or a small detail about their personality. For example, Ali was a quiet student who loved reading books. This short description gives identity and feeling. Even beginners can create strong characters with just a few clear details. Now we move to the middle of the story, which usually contains a problem. Without a problem, there is no story. Imagine a story where everything is perfect from start to finish. It would be boring. The problem creates interest because it makes the listener curious. What will happen next? Will the character succeed or fail? The problem does not have to be big, it can be simple, such as missing a bus, losing a phone, or forgetting homework. What matters is that something changes. When describing the problem, use clear timeline words. These words guide the listener step by step. Words like first, then after that, and finally make your story organized. For example, you might say, first, Ali left his house early. Then he realized he forgot his bag. After that, he ran back home. Finally, he reached school late. See how the timeline words create order? Even if the grammar is simple, the structure makes everything understandable. After the problem comes the solution, which is part of the ending. The solution shows how the character handles the situation. Sometimes the character succeeds, and sometimes they learn a lesson. The ending gives closure. It answers the question raised in the middle. If Ali was late for school, what happened next? Did the teacher forgive him? Did he promise to be more careful? The ending completes the journey, and it makes the story satisfying. Structure prevents confusion because it organizes ideas in a natural sequence. When learners speak without structure, they often jump from one idea to another. They start talking about the ending, then return to the beginning, and the listener becomes lost. However, when you train yourself to think in the order of beginning, middle, and ending, your speech becomes smooth. You know exactly what to say next because the structure guides you. Let me share a very simple story framework that beginners can use anytime. Start with a time phrase, yesterday, last week, or one day. Then introduce the setting and character in one sentence. After that, describe a small problem using one or two sentences. Finally, explain how it ended. That is enough. For example, yesterday, I went to the market. I wanted to buy some fruit, but I forgot my wallet. I felt embarrassed. Finally, my friend helped me, and I returned home happily. This short story follows a clear structure, and anyone can understand it. Another easy framework is called the four-step method: situation, challenge, action, result. The situation explains where and when. The challenge describes the problem. The action shows what the character did. The result tells us what happened in the end. You can use this method in conversations, exams, or presentations. It works everywhere because it is simple and logical. As you practice storytelling, remember that structure is your friend. It does not limit your creativity, it supports it. Once you know the structure, you can focus on emotion, vocabulary, and expression. But if you ignore structure, even strong vocabulary cannot save your story from confusion. The real power of story structure is that it gives you confidence before you even begin speaking. When someone asks you to share an experience, you do not panic. You think, beginning, middle, ending. You organize your thoughts quietly in your mind, then you speak clearly, step by step. This habit changes everything because organized thinking leads to organized speaking. By understanding story structure basics, you are building a strong foundation for English fluency. You are learning not just to speak, but to communicate clearly and logically. And when your ideas are clear, your message becomes powerful. 3. Simple story language. Now that you understand the structure of a story, it is time to focus on the language that brings that structure to life. Many learners believe that storytelling requires difficult vocabulary and long sentences, but that is not true. In fact, the most powerful stories are often told in simple language. If your words are clear, your message becomes strong. If your sentences are natural, your story feels real. Simple story language is not weak, it is effective. Let us begin with the most important grammar point in storytelling, the past tense. Most stories are told about something that already happened. That is why we usually use past tense verbs. For beginners, you do not need to master every rule. You only need to understand the basic idea. When something happened yesterday, last week, or a long time ago, we use the past form of the verb. For example, instead of saying I go to the park, we say I went to the park. Instead of she sees a dog, we say she saw a dog. This small change makes your story grammatically correct and easy to follow. Some verbs are regular, and they simply add at the end. For example, walk becomes walked, play becomes played, and talk becomes talked. These are simple and predictable. However, some verbs are irregular, and you must learn them step by step. Words like went, saw, said, felt, found, tried, and decided are very common in stories. If you master these verbs, you will already have strong tools for storytelling. Imagine this short example. One day, I went to the beach. I saw a small child who looked lost. He said he could not find his parents. I felt worried, but I tried to help him. Finally, we found his mother. Notice how simple the verbs are. There is no complicated grammar, yet the story moves smoothly. This is the beauty of simple story language. In addition to verbs, emotional words make your story more meaningful. Words like happy, sad, scared, surprised, confused, and excited are easy to use but very powerful. When you say, she was scared, the listener understands immediately. However, you can make it even stronger by adding a small detail. She was scared because she heard a strange noise. That short explanation creates depth. Emotion connects your listener to your story, and connection makes your story memorable. Time expressions are another important tool. They guide your listener from one moment to another. Words like one day, suddenly, later, after a few minutes, and in the end create flow. For example, you might say, one day, I decided to visit my friend. Suddenly it started to rain. Later, we laughed about it. In the end, it became a beautiful memory. Without these time expressions, your story may feel flat. With them, it feels organized and alive. Linking words also help you connect ideas smoothly. Simple linking words such as and, but so because, and however are extremely useful. For example, I wanted to go outside, but it was raining. This sentence shows contrast. Or, I studied hard, so I passed the exam. This sentence shows cause and effect. When you use linking words correctly, your sentences become natural, and your story becomes logical. Now let us talk about sentence patterns that beginners can copy and use immediately. One very simple pattern is, one day, I passed verb. For example, one day, I met a stranger. Another pattern is, I felt emotion, because reason. For example, I felt nervous because it was my first interview. You can also use first, then, finally. This pattern is excellent for organizing events step by step. For instance, first, I woke up late. Then, I missed the bus. Finally, I arrived at school tired but relieved. These patterns are easy, yet they make your speech confident. You do not need long sentences to sound fluent. In fact, mixing short and slightly longer sentences creates a natural rhythm. For example, I walked into the room. It was quiet. I felt something was wrong, although I could not explain why. Here, we combine short and complex sentences. The result sounds human and real, not robotic. This balance is important because real communication is not always simple or always complex. It is a mix. As you practice simple story language, remember that clarity is more important than difficulty. If you try to use very advanced words that you do not fully understand, you may feel stressed, and your story may become confusing. However, if you choose clear verbs, emotional words, and proper time expressions, your message will shine. Over time, your vocabulary will grow naturally because you are using words in context, not memorizing them without meaning. Another important tip is repetition. In storytelling, repeating key words is not a mistake, it is a technique. For example, he was scared. He was very scared. This repetition adds emphasis. It also helps beginners speak with confidence because they are not searching for new words every second. Repetition builds rhythm and emotional strength. By learning simple story language, you are building ready-to-use tools. You are not just studying English, you are preparing sentences that you can speak anytime. When someone asks you about your weekend, you can say, "Last weekend, I visited my cousin. We talked for hours, and I felt very happy." When you describe a problem, you can say, "I tried my best, but I failed. However, I learned an important lesson." These sentences are simple, yet they are powerful. The true goal is not perfection. The true goal is communication. With past tense basics, common storytelling verbs, emotional words, time expressions, linking words, and simple sentence patterns, you now have a complete beginner toolkit. Use it regularly. Practice telling small stories from your daily life. Slowly, you will notice that speaking becomes easier and your confidence grows. Simple story language is your bridge from silence to fluency. When you use these tools wisely, you are no longer just learning English, you are expressing your world in English. 4. Building characters. A story without characters is like a stage without actors. You may have a setting, you may have a problem, but if there is no person to experience that problem, the story feels empty. Characters are the heart of your story because they give it life, emotion, and direction. When learners understand how to build simple but interesting characters, storytelling becomes much easier and much more enjoyable. Let us begin with something very basic, but very important. Naming your character. A name makes the character real. Instead of saying a boy or a woman, give them a name like Allie, Emma, Daniel, or Priya. When you say, Allie was walking to school, the listener already feels closer to the character. A name creates connection. It does not need to be unique or complicated. Simple names work perfectly, especially for beginners. After naming the character, you can describe their age, job, or role. This gives context and makes the character clear. For example, Emma was a 25-year-old teacher, or Ravi was a young student who loved science. These short details help the listener understand who the character is. When you add one or two small facts, your story becomes more believable. You do not need to write a long biography. A few clear words are enough. Personality is another important element. Is your character brave or shy? Is he kind or impatient? Is she confident or nervous? Simple adjectives like friendly, quiet, honest, lazy, hardworking, or curious can describe personality clearly. For example, Daniel was a quiet but hardworking boy. Notice how we use but to add contrast. This small detail makes the character more interesting because real people are not perfect, they have strengths and weaknesses. Physical description can also help your character feel real. However, keep it simple. You can mention height, hair, or a small special feature. For example, she had long black hair and bright eyes, or he was tall and always wore glasses. These small details create an image in the listener's mind. When learners practice this, they are not only improving vocabulary but also developing imagination. Feelings are what truly connect the audience to a character. If your character feels happy, scared, excited, confused, or proud, the listener begins to care. Instead of only saying, "He was sad," you can add a reason. He was sad because he lost his job. When you explain why a character feels something, the emotion becomes stronger. Even a simple sentence like, "She felt nervous before the interview," can make your story powerful. Characters also need goals and dreams. A goal gives direction to the story. It answers the question, what does the character want? For example, Ali wanted to become a doctor, or Maria dreamed of traveling the world. When a character has a dream, the listener becomes curious. Will the character achieve it? Will something stop them? Goals create movement in the story and give it purpose. Another important element is showing character change. Good stories often show growth. At the beginning, the character may be afraid, but by the end, they become brave. Or maybe they are selfish at first, but later they learn to be kind. This change makes the story meaningful. For example, at first, Daniel was afraid to speak English. However, after months of practice, he became confident and proud. This transformation inspires the listener because it feels real and hopeful. One of the most effective ways to bring characters alive is through dialogue. Dialogue means the character speaks. When you include simple conversation, your story becomes dynamic. For example, instead of saying, "She was angry," you can write, "She looked at him and said, 'Why did you lie to me?'" Dialogue adds emotion and realism. It also allows learners to practice everyday expressions. When writing dialogue, keep sentences short and natural. Use quotation marks and simple reporting verbs like said or asked. For example, "I am scared," she said softly. "Don't worry," he replied. These short exchanges create energy in the story. They also give learners practical speaking examples that they can use in real life. Now, let us combine these elements into a small example. One day, Emma, a young nurse, walked into a new hospital. She was kind but very nervous. She had short brown hair and always smiled, even when she felt afraid. Her dream was to help people, but she was worried that she was not good enough. "I hope I can do this," she whispered to herself. At first, she made small mistakes, but she did not give up. In the end, she became one of the most trusted nurses in the hospital. Notice how the character feels real, even though the language is simple. Building characters is not about using difficult vocabulary. It is about clarity and emotion. When you give your character a name, age, personality, physical detail, feelings, and a goal, you create depth. When you show change and include dialogue, you create life. These tools are simple, yet they are powerful. As learners, you should practice creating small characters regularly. Write about a student, a shopkeeper, a child, or even yourself. Describe who they are, what they want, and what they feel. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. And once you can create relatable characters using basic English, your stories will never feel empty again. Remember, characters are not just people in a story, they are reflections of real life. When you understand how to build them clearly and simply, you are not only improving your English, you are learning how to express human experience in a beautiful and meaningful way. 5. Creating conflict. Every story needs movement, and movement begins with a problem. If everything is perfect, from the first sentence to the last, the story becomes flat and forgettable. Conflict is the challenge or difficulty that the character faces. It is the moment when something goes wrong, changes unexpectedly, or creates tension. Without conflict, there is no excitement, no curiosity, and no reason for the listener to continue listening. A story without conflict feels incomplete because real life itself is full of small and big challenges. So, what is conflict in simple words? Conflict is a problem. It is a situation where the character cannot immediately get what they want. For example, a student wants to reach school on time, but the bus does not arrive. A girl wants to speak English confidently, but she feels afraid. A man tries to send an important email, but the internet stops working. These are small conflicts, yet they are powerful because they create interest. The listener begins to wonder, what will happen next? For beginners, conflict does not need to be dramatic or complicated. In fact, simple problems are often better because they are easier to describe and easier to understand. A character may get lost in a new city. Someone may arrive late for an interview. A child may break a glass by mistake. Two friends may have a misunderstanding because one did not reply to a message. These everyday problems feel real, and when the audience recognizes them, they connect emotionally with the story. Problems make stories interesting because they create tension. Tension means the feeling of uncertainty. When a character faces a challenge, the listener waits for the solution. Imagine a story that begins like this. Ali went to the park and had a wonderful day. It is pleasant, but there is no tension. Now imagine this. Ali went to the park, but he suddenly realized he had lost his phone. Immediately, the story becomes engaging. The word but changes everything because it introduces contrast. It signals that something unexpected has happened. Words like but and however are simple, yet they are extremely powerful in storytelling. They create contrast and tension. For example, she studied very hard, but she failed the test. Or, he wanted to apologize, however he was too proud. These small linking words show that life is not always smooth. They create emotional movement in the story, and they help the listener feel the struggle. Emotional reaction words are also important when creating conflict. When something goes wrong, the character does not feel neutral. They may feel scared, confused, embarrassed, angry, disappointed, or worried. For example, when she saw that she was late, she felt nervous. Or, he was confused because he did not understand what happened. These emotional reactions make the conflict realistic. The listener understands not only the problem, but also how it affects the character. However, it is important to keep conflict simple, especially for beginners. If the problem is too complicated, it becomes difficult to explain in basic English. Choose problems that you can describe clearly. For example, instead of writing about a complex legal issue, write about missing a train. Instead of describing a political argument, write about two friends who stopped talking because of a small misunderstanding. Simple conflict allows you to focus on language and emotion rather than difficult details. Let us look at a short example. One day, Sarah went to a job interview. She was confident and hopeful. However, when she arrived, she realized she had forgotten her documents. She felt embarrassed and worried. For a moment, she wanted to leave, but she decided to speak honestly with the manager. In this example, the conflict is simple. She forgot her documents. The words, however, and but create tension. The emotional words embarrassed and worried show her feelings. The situation feels real, and the listener becomes curious about the ending. Conflict also helps characters grow. When a character faces a challenge, they must make a decision. They may choose courage over fear, honesty over lies, or patience over anger. This decision leads to development. For example, at first, Daniel was afraid to speak in class. However, he decided to try. Although his voice was shaking, he finished his presentation. The conflict of fear leads to growth. The story becomes meaningful because of that challenge. Remember, conflict does not always mean fighting. It can be internal, which means it happens inside the character's mind. A student may feel nervous before an exam. A person may feel unsure about a big decision. These inner conflicts are powerful because many people experience them in real life. When you describe internal conflict in simple language, you allow the audience to see themselves in the story. Virgil. As you practice storytelling, ask yourself one important question. What is the problem? If you cannot answer this question, your story may feel incomplete. Even a small challenge can bring life to your narrative. The problem creates the journey, and the journey makes the story memorable. By understanding conflict, you are learning one of the most important elements of storytelling. A story needs a challenge to feel real, because real life is not perfect. When you include simple, clear problems and emotional reactions, your stories become natural and engaging. And when your story feels real, your English feels alive. 6. Adding emotion. Oh. A story can have structure, characters, and conflict, but without emotion it feels dry. Emotion is the heartbeat of storytelling. It is what makes the listener care. When people remember a story, they do not always remember every detail, but they remember how the story made them feel. That is why adding emotion is not an extra skill, it is an essential one. The beautiful truth is that you do not need complex grammar to create emotion. Simple language, used honestly and clearly, can move hearts. One of the easiest ways to show emotion is through actions. Instead of saying, "He was nervous," you can show it. For example, his hands were shaking, and he kept looking at the door. The second sentence feels stronger, because we can see the emotion through action. When a girl is happy, she may smile widely, jump, or hug someone. When someone is sad, they may look down, speak softly, or sit alone. Showing feelings through actions makes your story more alive, even when your vocabulary is simple. Sensory language is another powerful tool. Sensory language uses words connected to the five senses: sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. Words like saw, heard, felt, and smelled bring the reader inside the story. For example, instead of saying, "It was scary," you can say, "She heard a strange noise in the dark room." Now the listener imagines the sound and feels the fear. Or you might say, "He felt the cold wind on his face," which makes the moment more real. Sensory words create images, and images create emotion. Body language also helps express feelings clearly. Body language includes small movements and physical reactions. For example, she crossed her arms and looked away, shows anger or disappointment. He lowered his head and avoided eye contact, shows guilt or sadness. These descriptions are simple, but they communicate deep feelings. Even beginners can use body language because it does not require difficult grammar. A short sentence like, "She wiped her tears," can say more than a long explanation. Short emotional sentences are extremely powerful. Sometimes, the strongest feelings are expressed in very few words. For example, "I was afraid," or "He could not believe it." These sentences are simple, yet they carry weight. When used at the right moment, short sentences create impact. They slow down the story and allow the emotion to breathe. You do not always need long explanations. Sometimes, silence and simplicity are enough. Repetition is another technique that strengthens emotion. In everyday conversation, we repeat words when we feel something strongly. In storytelling, repetition creates emphasis. For example, "He was tired, very tired," or "She waited and waited, but no one came." The repeated word shows intensity. It also makes the story sound natural, because real people speak this way when emotions are strong. Emotion improves memory, because feelings make information meaningful. When you feel something, your brain becomes more active. If you watch a movie that makes you laugh or cry, you remember it for years. The same happens with stories in English. When you connect emotion with language, the words stay longer in your memory. That is why emotional storytelling helps you learn faster and remember more easily. Let us look at a simple example. One day, Daniel went to the hospital to visit his grandmother. When he entered the room, he saw her lying quietly in bed. She looked weak, but she smiled when she saw him. Daniel felt a heavy pain in his heart. He held her hand and said softly, "I am here." For a moment, he could not speak. He was scared. He was very scared. Notice how the emotion is expressed through action, sensory language, and short sentences. The grammar is simple, yet the feeling is strong. Another example could show happiness. After months of practice, Sarah finally passed her English exam. When she saw her name on the list, she stopped for a second. She read it again. It was real. She jumped with joy and hugged her friend. "I did it," she shouted. She felt proud, and her eyes were full of tears. Here, repetition, body language, and emotional words work together to create a powerful scene. As learners, you should practice adding emotion to even small stories. Describe how you felt on your first day at school. Explain how you felt when you achieved something important. Use simple verbs, sensory words, and short emotional sentences. Do not worry about being perfect. Focus on being honest and clear. Remember that emotion does not mean drama. It means sincerity. Even a quiet moment can be emotional if described properly. A simple sentence like, "He smiled quietly because he knew he had tried his best," can touch the heart. When you add emotion to your storytelling, you transform simple language into powerful communication. Your stories become memorable, your listeners become engaged, and your English becomes expressive. You no longer just tell events, you share experiences. Truly. And that is the true goal of emotional storytelling: to make simple stories powerful, meaningful, and unforgettable. 7. Speaking your story. You may know how to build a story. You may understand structure, characters, conflict, and emotion. But there is one final step that truly changes everything: speaking your story out loud. Many learners can write well, and they can even think in English, yet when it is time to speak, fear appears. The voice becomes weak. The mind becomes blank. The heart beats faster. This is natural. However, confidence in speaking does not come from magic. It comes from practice, awareness, and the right mindset. The first rule of speaking your story is simple. Speak slowly and clearly. Many learners think that speaking fast means speaking fluently. That is not true. When you speak too fast, you make more mistakes, and your listener struggles to understand you. Clear communication is more important than speed. Speak at a comfortable pace. Let your words breathe. When you slow down, you give your brain time to choose the right words, and your sentences become stronger. Using pauses is another powerful skill. A pause is not a mistake, it is a tool. When you finish an important sentence, pause for a moment. This allows your listener to understand and feel what you just said. For example, if you say, "I walked into the room and I saw something I will never forget," the pause creates suspense. It adds emotion and control. Silence, when used wisely, can make your story more powerful than words. Eye contact is important in real conversation. When you speak to someone, look at them naturally. Do not stare in an uncomfortable way, but do not look at the floor either. Eye contact shows confidence and sincerity. If you are telling a story to a group, move your eyes gently from one person to another. This makes everyone feel included. Even if your grammar is not perfect, strong eye contact can make you sound confident and trustworthy. Shadowing practice is one of the most effective ways to improve spoken storytelling. Shadowing means listening to a short story or speech and repeating it immediately, trying to copy the tone, rhythm, and pronunciation. Choose simple stories. Listen carefully, then repeat sentence by sentence. This trains your tongue and ears together. Over time, your speaking becomes smoother because your brain learns natural patterns. Recording yourself is another powerful method. Many learners feel uncomfortable hearing their own voice, but this practice is extremely helpful. Record yourself telling a short story about your day. Then listen to it calmly. Notice your pronunciation, speed, and pauses. Do not criticize yourself harshly. Instead, observe and improve step by step. When you record yourself regularly, you become more aware of your strengths and areas to improve. One of the biggest mistakes learners make is overthinking grammar while speaking. When you focus too much on grammar rules, your story loses flow. Remember, communication is the goal. If you make a small grammar mistake, but your message is clear, you are still successful. For example, if you say, "Yesterday I go to market," instead of "went," the listener will still understand you. Of course, you should correct mistakes over time, but do not let fear of mistakes stop you from speaking. Confidence is not about being perfect, it is about being willing to try. Every fluent speaker once made mistakes. Every confident speaker once felt nervous. The difference is that they continued practicing. Build a positive mindset. Tell yourself, "I am learning. I am improving. Every time I speak, I become stronger." This simple belief can change your entire speaking experience. Let us imagine a small example. You want to tell a story about losing your keys. You begin slowly. "Yesterday, I left my house early for work." Pause. "But when I reached the gate, I realized my keys were missing." Pause again. "I felt nervous, so I went back inside and searched everywhere." Notice how calm and clear the storytelling becomes when you control your speed and pauses. The story feels organized and confident. Practicing daily speaking is important. You do not need a big audience. Speak to yourself in front of a mirror. Tell your story to a friend. Join a small conversation group online. The more you speak, the more natural it becomes. Confidence grows with repetition. Another helpful technique is preparing mentally before speaking. Think about the beginning, middle, and ending of your story. Organize your ideas quickly in your mind. Then start speaking without fear. Preparation reduces anxiety because you know what you will say. Remember that your voice carries emotion. When you speak happily, let your tone show happiness. When the story is serious, speak gently. Variation in tone keeps the listener interested. A flat voice can make even a good story boring, but a lively voice makes simple sentences exciting. In the end, speaking your story is about courage and practice. Speak slowly. Use pauses. Maintain eye contact. Practice shadowing. Record yourself. Do not overthink grammar. Most importantly, believe in your ability to improve. When you take these steps seriously, you do not just tell stories, you share experiences with confidence. And once you gain courage to speak your stories aloud, you step into a new level of English fluency. 8. Practice framework. Learning storytelling is powerful, but practice is what makes it permanent. Many learners feel motivated after understanding the theory, yet they do not know what to do the next day. Without a clear routine, motivation slowly disappears. That is why you need a simple, practical, and repeatable framework. When practice becomes a habit, improvement becomes natural. You do not need hours every day. You need consistency. Let us begin with a very simple habit, the 3-minute daily story. Every day, take just 3 minutes and tell a short story out loud. It can be about anything. It can be about your morning, your lunch, your class, or even a small problem you faced. 3 minutes may sound small, but if you practice every day, it becomes powerful. In 3 minutes, you can use a clear beginning, middle, and ending. You can practice past tense. You can add emotion. This small habit builds confidence step by step. Daily life is full of stories. Many learners say, "I don't know what to talk about." But your life gives you material every day. Did you miss the bus? That is a story. Did you meet a friend? That is a story. Did you cook something new? That is a story. When you begin to see daily life as storytelling material, you never run out of ideas. The secret is not finding big events. The secret is observing small moments carefully. Turning personal experiences into stories is an excellent way to improve fluency. When you talk about your own life, you already know the details. You do not need to imagine too much. For example, you can say, "Yesterday, I woke up late because my alarm did not ring. I felt stressed, but I quickly got ready and left home." This simple experience becomes a story when you add structure and emotion. Personal stories are powerful because they are real. Picture-based storytelling is another effective method. Choose a simple picture from a book or the internet. Look at it carefully. Ask yourself, who is in the picture? Where are they? What is happening? What might happen next? Then create a short story. For example, if you see a picture of a boy standing in the rain, you can imagine why he is there. Maybe he missed his bus. Maybe he is waiting for someone. Pictures help your imagination grow, and they train you to describe scenes clearly. Retelling movies in simple English is also very useful. Watch a short scene from a movie or a short video. After watching, pause and try to explain what happened in your own words. Use simple sentences. For example, in the scene, the man entered the room and saw a letter. He looked surprised. Then he called his friend. This exercise improves listening, memory, and speaking at the same time. It also helps you learn natural expressions. The story diary method is another powerful tool. Keep a small notebook or digital document. Every day, write a short story about something that happened. It does not need to be long. 5 or 6 sentences are enough. Focus on structure and clarity. At the end of each week, read your stories again. You will notice improvement. You will see that your sentences become smoother and your vocabulary becomes richer. Now let us talk about a weekly improvement strategy. Practice daily, but review weekly. At the end of each week, choose one story you told. Improve it. Add more emotion. Use better linking words. Correct small grammar mistakes. Record yourself telling the improved version. This process shows you progress clearly. Improvement becomes visible, and visible progress increases motivation. Consistency is more important than intensity. Practicing for 3 minutes every day is better than practicing for 1 hour once a week. Small daily effort creates long-term results. If you miss one day, do not feel guilty. Continue the next day. The key is to keep moving. You can also practice with a partner. Share stories with a friend who is also learning English. Listen to each other. Give simple feedback. For example, say, "Your story was clear, but maybe you can add more emotion." This friendly exchange builds confidence and communication skills. Remember that practice should feel enjoyable, not stressful. Choose topics that interest you. Talk about your hobbies, your dreams, or funny moments from your day. When you enjoy practice, you continue naturally. The goal of this framework is clarity and repetition. 3-minute daily stories, daily life material, personal experiences, picture-based practice, retelling movies, story diary writing, weekly review and improvement. This simple system creates structure in your learning journey. When you follow this practice framework consistently, you do not depend on motivation alone. You have a plan. You know what to do every day and every week. Over time, your storytelling becomes smoother, your confidence grows, and your English becomes natural. And that is the real power of a practice framework. It transforms knowledge into skill. It transforms fear into fluency. Most importantly, it gives you a clear action plan that you can follow from today. 9. Your first story. Now we arrive at the most important moment of this journey. You have learned about structure, language, characters, conflict, emotion, and practice. But knowledge becomes powerful only when you use it. This is your moment to create your first English story. Do not worry about perfection. Do not worry about difficult vocabulary. Focus on clarity, honesty, and courage. Today, you will build your own story step by step. The first step is choosing a simple topic. Many learners make the mistake of choosing something too big. They try to write about world history or complicated social issues. That is not necessary. Your first story should be simple and personal. It can be about your first day at school, a small mistake you made, a happy memory, or a challenge you faced. Simple topics are easier to explain, and they feel more real. When the topic is clear in your mind, your words come more easily. After choosing the topic, you must plan using structure. Remember the 3 basic parts: beginning, middle, and ending. Ask yourself simple questions. Where did the story happen? Who was involved? What was the problem? How did it end? Write short answers to these questions before you start writing full sentences. This small planning step makes your story organized and logical. Without structure, your ideas may become confusing, but with structure, everything becomes clear. Now it is time to write. Keep your sentences short and direct. For example, last year, I moved to a new city. I did not know anyone. I felt lonely at first. These short sentences are powerful because they are clear. You can combine some sentences if you feel comfortable, but do not try to impress anyone with complicated grammar. Natural writing sounds better than forced complexity. Mix simple sentences with a few longer ones, and your story will feel balanced. After writing the first version, take a short break. Then read your story again slowly. Editing is an important step. Check if your ideas are clear. Ask yourself, can someone understand this easily? Correct small grammar mistakes if you notice them, but do not spend too much time worrying about tiny details. Focus on clarity. Remove unnecessary words. Make sure the beginning introduces the story, the middle shows the problem, and the ending gives a solution or lesson. When you feel satisfied with your written story, it is time to speak it. Read it out loud slowly. Pay attention to your pronunciation and pauses. If possible, record yourself. Listening to your own voice may feel strange at first, but it helps you improve. Notice where you sound confident and where you hesitate. Practice speaking the story again until it feels natural. Each repetition builds fluency. Now let me show you a simple example. 2 years ago, I started learning English seriously. At first, I was very afraid to speak. I made many mistakes, and sometimes people did not understand me. However, I did not give up. I practiced every day, even when I felt tired. Slowly, I became more confident. Today, I am not perfect, but I am proud of my progress. This story is simple. It has a beginning, a problem, and a positive ending. It uses basic vocabulary, yet it feels meaningful. As you create your own story, remember that your experiences matter. Your small victories matter. Your challenges matter. You do not need to be a famous writer to tell a good story. You only need sincerity and effort. Every time you tell your story, you grow stronger as an English speaker. Motivation is important, but action is more important. Do not wait for the perfect moment. Do not wait until your grammar becomes perfect. Start now. Write your first story today. Speak it tomorrow. Improve it next week. This continuous process will change your confidence level completely. Believe in yourself. Every fluent speaker once stood where you stand now. They also felt nervous. They also made mistakes. The only difference is that they continued practicing. If you keep telling stories, your voice will become stronger, your vocabulary will expand, and your fluency will improve naturally. Now, here is your call to action. Choose a simple topic right now. Take a notebook or open your phone. Write 5 to 10 short sentences. Use structure. Add a small problem. End with a solution or lesson. Then read it out loud. Record it if you can. Repeat this process every day. By the time you finish this journey, you will not just understand storytelling. You will be able to create and tell your own English story confidently. And when you can tell your story clearly, you have taken a powerful step toward true English fluency. And now, the most important step is yours. You have the tools, the structure, and the confidence to begin. Remember, great speakers are not born, they are built through small, daily practice. Your story matters, your voice matters, and the world deserves to hear it. So start today. Write one simple story. Speak it with courage. And if this lesson inspired you, stay connected with Bookish English, because together, we are not just learning English, we are mastering it. Keep practicing, keep believing, and keep telling your story.